Call the meeting to order. Do we have any public comments signed up for today?
Don't think so, but no public comments.
First item of business is the approval of the minutes for the December 6th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to new business. Lauren, I'll let you start with the audit of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee.
So the first item we have is the audit of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. To give a little bit of background on this, back after the 2010 flood, Metro entered into an MOU with the Community Foundation to be the trusted partner for directing donations after an emergency or a natural disaster. The money that the Community Foundation is collecting under this MOU is not Metro funds. However, when you have council members or the mayor or anybody else within Metro directing individuals to donate, there is a need for transparency and accountability. Unfortunately, last year there were questions and concerns raised by Councilmember Johnston around the distribution of donations collected by the Community Foundation. She brought to the audit committee a request to do a full audit of the Community Foundation and their collections of donations related to three different events that occurred. That would be the 2020 tornado, the 2020 bombing, and the 2021 flood. The audit committee concurred that there was a need for an audit. And so they put parameters around it, and that would be that it was going to be a full audit. A performance audit coming out of our office is required to meet generally accepted government auditing standards, or Yellow Book standards. So the audit committee requested that the audit be a Yellow Book compliant audit, a performance audit around those processes and internal controls related to collecting and distributing the money under that MOU. They included the scope of the three events that Councilmember Johnston requested, and they asked that it be done by a third party. This was to take the burden off of our office. We have a small office that was at capacity at the time, so take that burden off of us and use one of our consultants. And additionally, the Community Foundation would pay for that audit. That motion was made and passed, and we engaged Barry Dunn, who is one of our consultants on contract, and they assigned the project team we normally have to do the audit. They produced a scope of work, meeting all the expectations that the audit committee had set forth. We met with them periodically throughout the audit and thought we were all on the same page. Unfortunately, in May, we received the draft report and noted that there were a lot of gaps, and that the scope of work that we intended was not necessarily being met. So we had a lengthy back and forth with the draft reporting process, but at the end of it, we just realized that we weren't going to get the full scope of the audit that we requested. We also had some concerns related to the meeting of Yellow Book standards. So we requested that they modify the compliance statement in that audit, which they did. Saying all of that, though we disagree with how the audit was done and the scope of it, we did feel it was important to release this audit to be transparent, but also because there's recommendations within this audit that are impactful to future MOUs, whether they are with the Community Foundation or any other organization. So with that, I'm going to high level talk about the audit. The audit itself, if you start looking at it, you'll notice that one of the first things is that two of the events requested were scoped out of the audit. This was because there was some disagreement on whether or not there was an activation of the Community Foundation for both the flood and the bombing. Barry Dunn decided to scope them out of the audit because of that. But that leads to one of the recommendations and observations that Barry Dunn had, which is there's no clear language in that MOU about what constitutes an activation. Is there a specific party? Is there a specific person? How is it documented? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? What constitutes activation? So that was one of the recommendations made, was to put some language around that. Some of the other pieces of this that you'll notice is that a lot of it's compliance. Did they meet the MOU? Did they not? And so some of the items were because the MOU is written under the assumption that they will be utilizing the Metro Nashville Disaster Fund. Two of these events impacted multiple counties, so the Community Foundation utilized the Middle Tennessee Fund and not the Metro Nashville Fund. Once again, the MOU doesn't have language over Do they have to use this fund? It's assumed in the MOU, but it's not necessarily stated. So once again, we get to a recommendation about putting clearer language around that in the MOU, so that if a different fund is going to be used or something like that, how do you still engage Metro in those decisions? That whether that's convening the committee or recognizing where the money is coming from. Additionally, accounting and auditing guidelines weren't sent out with these funds. Those are important for accountability on the end of it, whatever fund it comes out of. So those weren't sent out with any of the funds that Barry Dunn looked at. So the question then becomes, how do you know what they spent it on? How do you know how to track it? How do they know how to use it? And so that's the recommendation, is that accounting and auditing guidelines should always be sent out. And the last observation really centers around the whole reason that this MOU was signed, and that's being prepared for a disaster. There had not been one in a lengthy amount of time, but that's still why the MOU was in place, so that the Community Foundation would be ready, doing different practices to ensure that they were ready. And from the way that the money was distributed, it did not appear that they were prepared for that disaster. Now, all of these recommendations were made to the Community Foundation. It's an interesting situation we're in, where we don't have the ability to enforce these necessarily from our perspective as audit. However, in the letter received from Hal Cato, the CEO, he did respond and accept all of these recommendations. He mentioned in that letter steps that are already being taken to better processes and to ensure that these things don't happen again. So with that, if there are any questions or comments about this.
I don't know, do we want to hear from Mr. Cato? I know he wanted to speak to it, so I wanted to give him the opportunity first, I think.
Sure.
Sorry to put
It's
you
a
on the
small
spot.
room. No, okay. It's all right. Here, let me just sit down for a minute. Where do I start? Yes, we, from day one since I got there, which has now been a year, made strengthening relations with Metro priority, knowing that as I accepted the job that this audit was coming, and wanted to move forward to do whatever we could to partner with you guys on this, including paying for the audit, accepting the auditor you recommended, and then just following their lead, and we did all that. Staff spent a lot of time with Barry Dunn, and we thought we were just doing exactly what they expected. Finished the audit in the summer. I responded back end of August. I can't remember when exactly I wrote my response letter, and then it just kind of went quiet. And we were told not to share anything about the audit until Metro, this group, had convened and talked about it, and just didn't hear anything until November. And that was when, okay, they didn't do what we asked them to. They were supposed to do all three, and on and on and on. So it's frustrating for us as much as it is for you, because we all worked on it. We hope for something better. I do think, though, that the findings that they pointed out are already being put in place. Even without a current MOU, United Way, Metro Council, and Community Foundation are working to make sure that everything they pointed out that is clear, and the tornado that struck as recently as 2 days ago. So I'm frustrated about the time that we spent on it, but still willing to take what we learned from it, still willing to split whatever cost we need to with Metro to fulfill our end of the bargain, and just, you have my word. And I'm happy to share, our new updated policies and procedures that we're putting in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's okay. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll just go sit back there.
Or run away. No, I just think it's really important to point out that the Community Foundation, a year ago and prior, I think was handled very, very differently, and we're moving forward. I'm hoping with a clean slate, and I think everyone was disappointed in the results of the audit from the scope of work, and how deep did they go, and are we really getting the answers to the questions that the public wanted to know, is where did the money go, and how was it spent, and what good did my donation do, right? And so I know that you're going to be releasing that information so we can have more of those questions answered than what the audit did. But from my perspective now, and I'm looking forward to seeing that information, but from my perspective now is one of the reasons I wanted to do the audit was to make sure that we're partnering with people that are the best partners that we can partner with in order to be as responsive and as efficient and effective when we have a disaster, to pulling that money in and getting that money out as fast as possible to respond, because everything comes back to where's the money. And so I think after conversations that we've had with your group, CFMT, as well as United Way, and OEM actually, I think we're on a much better path. I feel much better about it, and I think we have learned strengths and weaknesses from different organizations, and that the MOU that we're working on now, I'm really excited about, and I feel like we're on the best path forward to take advantage of each individual organization's strengths and how we can come together and work for a common goal so that we can respond to the people that need our help as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. So it's a moving forward thing now. So I appreciate your work on it and your willingness to continue on. And I know it's been sort of an ugly process, but I think we're at a better place now.
We're a much better place. And as a matter of fact, if you go to either Community Foundation's website today or United Way website today, you'll see two opportunities to give to survivors of this tornado. Davidson County, outside of Davidson County. So we're already putting into place the recommendations that came from the audit.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
So one of the other recommendations was to ensure that when the money begins to be distributed, that along with it goes the accounting guidelines that they'll need to follow. Have you had time to get that in place already? So
We do have it in place. We haven't, it's still an active disaster mode. We're still assessing the situation, so it's not time to make grants. Davidson County grants, though, will not come from the Community Foundation. United Way, we're talking about an MOU that's not done yet, but United Way will be responsible for making grants in Davidson County out of the tornado.
Great.
I just want to inquire, so I see your letter here that is responsive to the Barry Dunn audit specifically. You mentioned some data that might be on your website just from an accountability perspective. So could you speak to kind of next steps as far as the information that you are going to share with
So
the
we do
community?
have the other two reports that were not activated, but are referenced in the audit that we can share this week with you guys. It's a couple of big Excel spreadsheets, but it'll show you every dollar that went out the door, when, and who it went to. Now, so once the grant is made to the organization, we don't audit the organization. It's up to them, and they just to report back on how they spent it.
Understandably, I think,
But yes,
I think
that
that gets to
information is
maybe a
available.
little bit more clarity, because when you have things that there's some kind of ambiguity or misunderstanding in the community, and you have a leadership transition, anytime you can say, these were the organizations to which we actually dispersed this money, I think in kind of supplement to your response here will be helpful.
And we do have that information,
Okay,
yeah.
that's great. And then to Councilwoman Johnson, I guess, and she was alluding to some conversations that you've been having about kind of the next MOU. I know on the Metro Council side of the House, we deferred legislation to our first meeting of January, which is actually January 16th. And so I guess I was wondering, Ms. Johnson, do you intend to bring an amendment to be responsive to that conversation, or can you speak to that, please?
Yes, so we've all met, and it was really productive conversation, and I think we all feel better about what we've come up with versus what we had, even the second one that we were contemplating on through the council. And so that's going through legal now, so I don't know if that's you or not. Is it you? No, it's one of you. So you're going through legal to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And then we'll come back with a final draft, and I will be filing a substitute. And I think it's okay to share that, unfortunately, we've had a disaster so soon before the ink could even really dry on the draft. But I think we all felt, they all felt so comfortable with it that they're actually operating underneath that MOU that has not actually even been signed yet. So that's, again, strengths and weaknesses, and what we do well, we're going to do well. What you do well, and we're going to stay in our own lanes. And so I'm not going to speak any more about it because it's not public quite yet. But as soon as it's filed, obviously, I think it'll all make sense.
So all the points that were addressed here as to a specific, very clear, what is an activation? Is that formalized into a letter?
100%.
What are the reporting requirements
Yes.
back out? By what time?
Yes.
A lot more specificity.
Yes.
Okay, right.
Yeah, if I could, Brian, so some final perspective from a, management leadership standpoint from the administration. So, looking back on this, we've got an emergency management arrangement that dates back more than a decade that has these provisions in it. We were a much smaller city and frankly a less capable city when it came to our emergency response at that time. So fast forwarding, we get some recent events, some just a few years ago, the 2020 tornado and so forth. Those begin to happen and we learn that arrangement's a bit stale. It's not one that's really going to serve us well. And on the one hand, the money that's been collected and the monies that we're talking about, it's not the Metro money. In other words, not directly the taxpayers' money, although some of those donors to Community Foundation and others in the community, they are our taxpayers as well. And so our connection there, it was stale. It has been much improved since then, and what I admire the most about this whole process is that both sides, both the Metro government, the period that since I've been with you, and the Community Foundation have really come together, and to the point that was made just a moment ago, very sadly, we've had this event here just over the weekend that has brought us together, and the spirit has just permeated. When I arrived at the Emergency Management Center on Saturday to take up the duties of the financial officer there, Mr. Cato was there, United Way was there, Vice Mayor Henderson, and others whose council members whose districts were impacted, and to Councilmember Johnston's point, acting as if all the conversations we have here are going to lead to a great place, and quite frankly, I put it to the test. I went ahead and made a contribution to the Community Foundation, watched it work while we were there, and I have every confidence in the world in Mr. Cato's leadership, his board, who has been magnificent working with me in the background, and I'm very confident we'll get to an arrangement that will last us. But I do think we need to realize this work is never over. So what is current today could be stale 10 years from now. So as we go, we've got a much more robust emergency management system than we've ever had, many more processes in place, and I think we should look at this as an ongoing way for us to grow really as a community. So I'm thankful that Councilmember Johnson was so vocal at the time. I know that was very difficult for you and your constituents, and sometimes it's hard to get the attention that you need, but I think at this moment you should be proud of that. Community Foundation, our community overall, should be really, really proud of the work you've done, the transparency you've brought, and I'm sure that you continue to do so. Thank you, everybody, for that. From an administration standpoint, I don't think we could be more pleased with the direction that this has landed. We regret that the audit results weren't more conclusive, but I do think we've gotten an awful lot of value out of this entire process. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Other questions or comments? All right, we'll move on then to the soccer stadium construction.
Our next audit is the audit of the Major League Soccer stadium construction. This audit is not like our typical construction audits. We typically in a construction audit would look at change orders and approvals and making sure that certain contract requirements are met. But for this one, we actually took a different path. At our last meeting where we had a construction audit presented, at that time, Councilmember Suara was part of our audit committee. It was of the Criminal Justice Center right across the street. She asked the question if we had looked at compliance with wages for that audit, which we hadn't. We had done our typical construction audits with change orders and other processes. So we kept it in the back of our mind. So with the soccer stadium audit, we decided that one of the objectives would be to look at compliance with local wage laws. Councilmember Suara had thrown out Davis-Bacon type laws. We also decided to encompass in this audit the disadvantaged business enterprise percentage utilization, as they had large goals with this project, and making sure there were controls and processes around ensuring that those happened. So for disadvantaged businesses, they went above and beyond their goal. They had a goal set of 30%. They hit 37%. We did work behind it. There was processes in place. They did lots of recruiting and other methods to get individuals involved in this. And so there was very much, those were in place. The second one is a little bit more tricky. So first, what we do when we do an audit is we try to establish criteria. And this was one where it was almost impossible to establish criteria. As I mentioned, Councilmember Suara had thrown out Davis-Bacon laws. Davis-Bacon is a federal law that you pay a prevailing wage over minimum wage for federal construction projects. Back in 2015, Metro actually had a law on Metro Code that said that Metro construction projects would follow Davis-Bacon laws. The state preempted that. They changed the laws in 2015 so that Davis-Bacon could not be utilized by municipalities and instead limited the minimum wages that could be enforced. They limited it to construction, interstate construction, where they have a list of wages, but then they also threw in there Tennessee Department of Labor prepared annual wages for construction workers. Metro Council changed the Metro Code to mirror this change in the Tennessee Code. Metro Council went a step further and made it a very specific code where they named the report that was produced by the Tennessee Department of Labor. So when we started this audit, the first thing that our senior auditor at the time, Innocent Dogby, started doing was he tried to find that report. And that's when he realized he couldn't find the report. That report stopped being produced in 2019. So that, in effect, made the Metro Code obsolete. So then we started working with trying to talk to the Department of Labor to determine what the data was behind this, because maybe we could fall back on the Tennessee Code. The Tennessee Code states that the Tennessee Department of Labor, creates or approves, I'm trying to remember what the word is that I'm looking for, produces, what is the word? Basically, they produce.
Published?
Publishes the wages for the state. Tennessee Department of Labor no longer does that. Instead, they collect the data, they send it to the federal government, and the federal government does it for the state. So that, in effect, makes the Tennessee Code obsolete. With that, we fall all the way back to the federal minimum wage. So with that, every employee that we looked at on this job or on this construction project was paid the federal minimum wage. But in this exercise, they had processes, I'll say that as well. They had Walsh Management Company, who then had Messer, Mortensen and Messer, joint ventures, who had procedures in place to monitor payroll. They would, I think it was weekly, they would import that payroll and compare it to this, the federal minimum wage. So they were paying all their employees the correct amount. But what we found in this exercise was there were a few observations because of this. The first one being to the Metro Council that the code needs to be updated. The code needs to be, the intent of this was to pay individuals more than just the minimum wage. So the Metro Code needs to be updated. We had 3 recommendations, the first one being to update the Metro Code to reflect the current process. But also the second recommendation to include in that classifying job classification, or requiring job classifications of contractors to agree with the state. That way it's easy to look one for one instead of if contractors are utilizing their own classifications, it's hard to determine who should be getting paid what. Is a person a general laborer if it's not on the list? And the last, since there is no authority to change state law by Metro, it's to work with Metro, or to work with the state to ensure that that state law is also updated. Just changing that one word would ensure that individuals could be paid above that minimum wage. Those 3 recommendations were responded to by our vice mayor and president of Metro Council. All 3 of those were accepted with action plans in this audit. The next observation that we had related to procurement, Metro procurement. They're facilitators of all of our contracts. And in most of our construction contracts, it's a generic clause that says that the contractor will follow federal, state, and local wage laws. Understandably, you cannot put all of the wage laws or all of any laws in a contract, and so it's a catch-all. But what we recommended, since this is important to the Metro government, to try to enforce these higher wages, that they altered the language within the contract to say something along the lines of including but not
Limited to.
yeah, some type of including statement to say, to call it out so that those contractors who are signing that contract know that that's what they're going to be held to. And not just doing it at the contract level, but also doing it at the solicitation level. If somebody's going to be making a bid on a construction project, they should know what wages they're going to be held to. So it will help to get better bids that are actually more accurate. Because in the event that these laws get changed, they would take effect immediately, or whenever the time period was. And so if there's contracts in place, then they would take effect. So ensuring that contractors know that when they're bidding for projects. And the third one is, as I mentioned, procurement is our facilitator of contracts. They aren't the ones who oversee them. That's at the department level. So procurement annually does a great training with a lot of us that are involved in the procurement process to try to teach us how to monitor our contracts along with other procurement processes. We would recommend that they either include this in their training or they do a separate training, somehow get the departments involved so that they're aware of it. This spreads across all construction contracts in Metro. So different departments manage different construction projects, and that way they're aware of it. All three of those were accepted by procurement. And there's action plans in there to work with the Procurement Standards Board to ensure that they're implemented. The third observation related to the Sports Authority. Sports Authority, as I said, had procedures in place to ensure that the payroll was meeting that wage law. Our question is, why didn't somebody ask about these wage laws? And so if you're monitoring your contracts, not just Sports Authority, but you think about any other construction contract, but for the Sports Authority level, making sure that somebody's aware of these laws. So somebody should have asked the question of, is this code in place? Since this was, we have a legal opinion stating that this was one that would fall under Metro's procurement code. Whereas not all Sports Authority contracts are under procurement code. So this would only apply to the ones that are within Metro procurement code. And that is putting in place some process to monitor those wages. It could be as simple as still utilizing the third party to do this, but just having an understanding of what that third party does, and every once in a while saying, can you show me the results of the last time you did this? Almost like a little audit like we would do. So that was our recommendation to the Sports Authority. Since the Sports Authority reports up to the board of the Sports Authority, as you'll see in the report, they have neither accepted or rejected this one. We're going to present this on Thursday to the Sports Authority board to get their recommendation on whether or not they accept or reject this one. And the last one was, while Innocent was doing his audit work, he came across a resolution that was put forth by now Mayor O'Connell. At the time, the request was made for an amendment to the intergovernmental agreement between Sports Authority and Metro to update it to include the requirement for Sports Authority to collect certified copies of payroll, summarize them, and send them over to Metro Council on like a monthly basis. That was approved by council. It never made it to the intergovernmental agreement. So Sports Authority did not know that they had to follow this because it wasn't in the agreement. So we recommended to the Department of Law that there's a process to go from that approved resolution to the amendment. As rare as they are, it still needs to have a process in place to ensure that it happens. So those are our recommendations and observations. I'll recognize Monica Faulknotson, who is the Director of Sports Authority, as well as Jim Pashevsky. Did I do that right?
That was very good.
Okay, thank you. Who is with CPS, who is Project Manager for this. If there's any questions.
Do we have any questions?
I don't want to have any questions, but I do want to compliment you on the work that was done here. I know that is a complicated trail over a long period of time, and similar to the matter we just discussed on Community Foundation, there are things that quickly get stale and challenged. So thank you for all of that, and thank you, I'm sure, for wading through that. I'm sure it's not easy for you.
Lauren was fantastic to work with and very
And I'll say
patient with us.
innocent Dogby, who's now over payroll within Metro Finance, unfortunately, for us. He did fantastic work, and if you wanted somebody to dig, that is exactly who we put on this.
This was easier than other ones. This was easier than other ones.
That's true. The jail was a lot of fun, too.
Sadly for you, gladly for my team.
I know, exactly.
I'm sure there will be payback.
No pun intended. Well, question, this may or may not be our purview, but there's another sports construction project coming up soon. Will these wage information procedures apply to that, or is that a different animal?
Teresa can correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll depend on the contracts on whether or not they're under the Metro Procurement Code
Right,
purview.
right.
And then if all these laws change, they would go in effect at that point in time.
I mean, I think, I have two other members of my department sitting in the back, so I'm kind of looking at them. I think either way that it goes, that there's kind of like an awareness of this issue at a high level now, especially as the changes to the Metro Code and hopefully the state law proceed forward. And so I think that there will be awareness regardless of whether it's under procurement or not. But certainly, I would assume procurement would be somewhat involved.
Do we have the legislation initiated?
I've spoken with Ms. Darby, and so we are in progress on that and being responsive to this audit. And then we will as well make, I guess, the mayor's lobbyist team aware of the requests to state government, just to make sure that's rectified on that side. Of course, we can only ask, right? We can't control that process. So I do think, to Councilwoman Allen's point, that will probably be sort of the largest kind of elephant in the room or question, right? It's like, okay, well, subsequent to this, what is the application, if any, to the Titans Stadium? But Ms. Castones, can you explain then whether it falls under the procurement code or not? What is the distinction? Like, what, I mean, how would it or would it not?
I mean, so generally, most procurements of any kind of vendor whatsoever to perform any service or sell any good to the metropolitan government is going to be through Metro Procurement. It's not just through the it's something that applies to almost all departments. Now, Josh is here as Sports Authority's attorney, and I don't want to speak out of turn. Was there an amendment to the intergovernmental agreement to say that the Sports Authority did not have to follow procurement's processes?
Are you saying with respect to the soccer stadium or the
Going forward.
I don't believe there was an amendment, and I should mention for the football stadium, it's structured a little bit differently than the MLS soccer stadium, and so the way that is structured is actually the team is doing all the procurement, and so you don't really have the same grafting of the procurement code on the team as it was the case with the Sports Authority with the MLS stadium.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, with that, we'll then move on to the annual comprehensive financial report and the presentation by our external auditors.
You turn to the one booklet I handed out to everybody. I think you've all got it. This is an audit that took thousands of hours wrapped into about 15 pages, 15 slides. So if there's more questions you have, I understand. Kind of starting with the agenda on the first page, we're going to go through our team members are, which is extensive, with different DBEs that we're working with that I'll point out. And really, I want to make clear what our responsibilities as the external auditors are, what the responsibilities of management is, and of this audit committee. I'll go through some of the fraud, some of the audit procedures we do. Those, what our deliverables were, what our methodologies are, and how we get to the audit procedures that we do, and then any kind of accounting developments, if you will. So on page 3 is our engagement team. This kind of gives you an idea of the major sections that encompass the audit. So we have teams in all these different squares. And as you can see, we took our DBs, we take that responsibility serious. I think we're 32% was our DBE goal for this audit. And we take, for instance, Angelita Dobbs is in the central government and her firm, as well as Hoskins with Gina Income. She's also in charge of the constitutional offices. We have Dawit over here in the MNPS, so he's doing the majority of the hours there with his firm. And I think this is the first year we've worked with all 3 of these firms. and I think it's gone pretty well. So just wanted to point that staffing out. Page 4, first of all, I want to go over the external auditor's responsibilities. Our responsibilities express an opinion, whether the financial statements are that are prepared by management, right here next to me, Jennifer, are materially correct, and that this committee right here obviously is the oversight committee, and that part of our obligation is to report to you that everything is within material range and conformity with U.S. GAAP. Also, that includes government audit standards. That's kind of the second paragraph here, what's known as uniform guidance. This comes to the compliance audit with your state and federal funding. So I'll get to that in a little bit. The third paragraph, maintaining independence. Of course, we have to be independent. We don't only have to be in fact, but in the public view as well. And we have to offer professional skepticism. And then finally, we're required to report to the audit committee, to this body, and any material weaknesses or significant deficiency, any fraud detected, any instances of noncompliance, we'd be required to report to you. Now over here on the right side of the slide is responsibilities of management. So management is responsible for fairly presenting the financial statements in conformity with GAAP, with adopting the proper accounting policies. Remember, we're just auditing these. Establishing and maintaining the effective internal controls that we do audit. Preventing and detecting fraud and disclosing to the audit committee as well and to us if they see any kind of fraudulent activity or weaknesses in internal control.
John, can I stop you just for a moment?
Absolutely.
This is a comment I'm going to make just from something that happened at our last meeting. So we spent some time talking about what the surplus budget would mean, right? And that is being cued from this report, this ACFR report. And so when I had asked at that time, could we add a schedule here to account for that? Because it's a new item, it's an unusual item for us to connect these dots. That is not something that will be audited, but rather recognizes here, these are our financials. They're just expressing an opinion about them. We have a section, one at the beginning and one towards the end of an audit, where we can provide our own management discussion and spot the end where we can put supplemental information to really explain what it is that we're doing here. And I think that's a really important distinction, because even though it'll all come to us in this nice, neat, pretty binder, kind of like this, and it looks like they've audited every little thing, that's really not the case. They're ours, and it's as much a management tool as it is anything else.
Thank you. Yeah. Slide 5, the next one, independence. The Rule 101 of the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct spells out what our responsibilities are and what it means to be independent, both in fact and appearance. We do have and we're required to have a quality control policy manual that is audited in a peer review process every 3 years, which is becoming more and more stringent every year, as our chair knows, and it's going to become an ongoing process where we're reviewed by our peer group throughout the year, every year, rather than once every 3 years all at once. So, and you know, we're reporting to you that we are independent through our quality control process and through, and trust me, our Metro audit work papers are audited every year by the state in person. It's always picked as, our external peer reviewers always pick Metro, and we are independent. We've never had a problem with that. The next slide addresses SAS 99, which is our auditing requirements around fraud risk. It specifically addresses the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. So what is required of us, and this was a new standard of probably 10 years now. More and more, it used to be external auditors just said fraud. This isn't a forensic audit. We're not responsible for anything with fraud. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's still not a forensic audit, but there are lengthy requirements of us, and gathering information, brainstorming with our engagement team, inquiry of management, not just the finance team, all around Metro government. People you wouldn't normally think you would inquire come audit time. We're asking questions. Any unusual or unexpected relationships, a lot of those come up in analytical procedures, and then we're directly looking at them for fraud. And then after we identify these high-risk areas, we'll respond to those with substantive procedures. And we'll test for a management override. Is there any collusion, or, we'll look at any manual journal entries, and we're required to look at a sample of those. And then we'll evaluate all this evidence, and, that becomes just like our substantive procedures, that becomes our risky areas of fraud. And we look at those specific areas to see if we find any. We did not find any material instances of fraud. Lengthy way of saying that, but I wanted to explain the process of how we got there. It's not a quick process. 7 is our deliverables. Today is the annual comprehensive financial report, the top one. We do have a draft. General Hospital does have their own set of financial statements and management letters. The report is still in draft form, but we anticipate an unmodified opinion, as well as MNPS internal school funds. The single audit, we're in the process of testing those federal programs right now. We'll probably issue those, I don't even want to guess, but hopefully in the next couple months we'll be in front of you issuing that single audit. Other deliverables, required communications, that's what this is today, as well as our management letter. We've talked about, loosely talked about that, and if we have any findings, and that will be, at the conclusion of the single audit, and we'll report whether we have any material weaknesses in all of Metro government, not just the central government, or significant deficiencies, or any, and I'm sure we'll have some management letter comments, just some things that we saw that could help strengthen controls, and it's an opportunity for us to report back if we see anything that we think Metro should implement, and we think it rises to the level that this committee needs to address. At that time, we'll make those. And then finally, the data collection form, which y'all will probably not see that, but that's where we upload all the information and results of the single audit. The compliance federal grants audit has to be uploaded to a database for the federal government, so all the relevant federal programs that sent that money down have a single place to go and see the results of the audit. Next, page 8, our audit methodology and our approach. We have it in chart form here, and then the next slide I'll go through it in the narrative. But the 4 biggest big areas, if you could break it down, is the audit planning and risk assessment, control evaluation and the testing, the substantive testing, and then completion and reporting. So on slide 9, in our audit planning, which is, I would say a good 25-30% of the audit it's assessing risk. What are we going to audit this year? It changes every year. I mean, it depends on what's going on in Metro government, and we're going after the risky areas. So one area that might be risky last year is not this year, and it might be next year, but not, And so we're looking at where those risk areas are, and we're designing our either control testing around that area or our substantive testing. So down here on the left side is where we ended up with our control evaluation. So things like cash receipts and revenue, we can see the controls in place around cash receipts or property tax or purchasing or employee bank recs, and then we can test those controls at a stat level and determine that those whether we feel comfortable.
Interrupt for a second. What would be an example of a control on employee compensation, a control of a risk factor?
Well, we'll be looking at the employee files and see what's required to have in those, and we'll look at who is responsible for those files being complete, whether it be the I-9 or whatever's in that file, and who's responsible for the sign-off. Is there a little sign-off in the corner or whatever the procedure might be to ensure that they're there and that they're complete, accurate. And
Make sure you have proper pay rate, make sure that the pay time for the period is properly authorized.
Make sure the pay actually follows through to the general ledger. Make sure the expense is actually what it's supposed to be coming out of the employee
Do we have
fund.
controls around when someone is getting paid regular pay, but not necessarily, are we looking at when they access the building to make, does that make, you know what I mean? Like, are we looking at those records to make sure they're actually showing up and not just clocking in?
That's a little outside of the purview of a
Okay.
financial statement audit. I mean, if we have a reason to believe that's occurring, then,
Okay.
you know, we might look at it if we think
I'm
it's
just wondering how deep
material
you
to
get
that
into-
expense.
and I
Yeah,
just
I mean,
pick-
and that's a big one. I think all companies are dealing with that
Yeah.
today. Are our employees, especially the ones working from home, actually working?
Yeah, well, or not even working from home, but
Right, or,
still,
sure.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Now, on the right side, sometimes it's more timely and better audit evidence for just doing substantive testing, like investments, if we can confirm with anytime you can confirm something with a third party, that's the best audit evidence. So if we have investment statements with a outside brokerage firm or cash with, you know, whatever bank, Pinnacle Bank, and we can have those third parties tell us what those balances are, that's the best evidence. So sometimes, you know, property, plant, you know, property, plant, equipment, if we look at invoice vouching, subsequent events, we can do invoice vouching. So sometimes it just makes more sense to do substantive testing, and, you know, these might switch year to year, but.
So, I know this is new, and I want to help with this. So, he said something so important a moment ago, you know, if we know about it, if somebody tells us. So, we're going to have to assign a management representation for every one of the audits that we do. We always have, we always will. And it says, hey, we're representing to you, we don't know of anything else here. So that relies really, you know, once we sign that, on what departments are telling us, what do we see internally and so forth. And it's up to us to surface it if we want it for this purpose. But likewise, if we see something just in our normal course that wouldn't rise to the level of a financial statement on it because it's material, then we would come to Lauren, right? And so we've seen that recently, last week when we were deliberating Arts Commission, right? You know, some of the turbulence that we've heard about there. It's not to say whether it is or isn't, that's a different avenue we go through. And then on top of it, just in our department, specific to grants, we have a grants accountability area that it may be a better fit for. So I don't want you to walk away from his conversation feeling like, oh gosh, this is our only avenue. We actually have a lot of others that help us.
Good point, thank you.
Yeah.
The next slide, page 10, a single audit. So this is our audit of federal grants. In 2023, you had approximately $407 million. So we're required by the OMB, if you're a low-risk auditee, to cover 20% of that $407 million, 20% of your total. It's based on federal expenditures during the year. If you're a high-risk auditee, it would be 40%. So you can tell, I mean, in the past, we've had years where you were high risk, and some of the audit committee members is, how many more hours are we paying for you to audit because we had a finding last year?
Who determines what level of risk you're at?
We do.
There's,
Wait, what do you mean? Wait.
There's criteria set to determine whether it's 20 or 40%. If you
Oh,
have,
that-
if you have
yeah, yeah, yeah.
material
I'm saying, like, who says if
No,
we're
we
high
don't
risk or
determine
low
that.
risk?
Yeah, if you have material weaknesses in the previous 2
It
years.
was based on previous.
Yeah, you would be a
Okay.
high-risk auditee. If you had, a going concern issue, then you would be a high-risk auditee. There's certain criteria that determine whether you're high-risk
Okay.
or low-risk, and that's set by the OMB, not by us, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I misunderstood your question.
Thank you.
Good question, sorry. I
Thank you.
misunderstood.
No, that would be funny, like, oh, you're high risk, we need another 4,000 hours. I'm just kidding.
That would make us not independent.
Yeah.
And actually, under our contract, like this year, we're we 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 major programs. It would be a lot of federal programs for us to start billing extra. We try to, since it's a 5-year contract, we don't know how many major programs it's going to be year to year. So we kind of get an average of a guess, and that's our fee. So I think we have, I can't remember how many, but it's over 10 where we start. And it's very stipulated how much above that program. But
Yeah, I wasn't asking that in like a getcha. I really just wanted to know who's determining what are those criteria to
Right.
determine if you're
the
low
big,
risk
the
or
big
high
one
risk.
is whether you had a material weakness in the last, you're high risk for the next few years if you have a material
That makes
weakness.
sense.
When it comes to federal grants, unlike a financial audit, there's a lot less judgment on our part.
Yeah.
OMB sets out exactly what we're supposed to do from the standpoint of compliance issues or compliance attributes, et cetera. So, I mean, we have a lot less latitude in the single audit section or the federal section than we do in the financial statement section.
That's why I kind of go out of my way to call it a compliance audit, because it truly is. The next slide, I won't go over these in detail. These are just accounting pronouncements that were adopted this year. I mean, you'll see these in the accounting policies in the act for, first one dealing with conduit debt obligations. Really, the only one of these four that is the third one, subscription-based information technology arrangements. I think we talked a little bit about that last meeting. It's largely based off of GASB 87, which is for leases. It's the same thing except for subscription-based technology, and it was 30-something million this year that was adopted. The next slide, 12. Every set of financial statement has accounting estimates. It just do. And so our responsibility is to look at those estimates to see that we think they're reasonable and that they're in compliance with GAAP, and we believe they are. Unaudited information, Kevin kind of alluded to that, the statistical section of the back, or the MD&A up in the front. We do read these, by the way, and we do recalculate and we tie them into the financial statements. We're going to make sure they're consistent with the rest of the audited report. The other transactions that are where actual are required communications are the following bullet points. No transactions for which there's a lack of authoritative guidance. Sometimes you'll have some transaction that occurs that there's just no literature to follow. So, but we didn't see any of that. All significant transactions have been recognized in the proper period. No alternative accounting policies or practices. No difficulties encountered in dealing with management during the audit. It went very well. Management is really,
kudos to Jennifer in her first year in this position.
Yeah, it's just really fantastic. I mean, there's been some turnover, and it's been wonderful. No disagreements with management regarding the financial statements or reporting. This is also what Kevin alluded to. Management provided appropriate representation at the conclusion of our audit. So we put a lot of thought into who should be on that representation letter, who's positioned to be there. So anything that we're asking for, we're being provided, and that's what's being repped to us. Nothing's being withheld from us. And we're not aware of any communications by management with other independent accountants. You're welcome to get a second opinion from other firms. We just want to be part of the conversation to make sure, the Baxters, everybody sees it the same way. Finally,
that's very unusual, by the way.
Yeah, very
unusual. The peer review process is meant to overcome most of those urges.
I'm not sure I've ever had to report yes on that, but anyway. On 14, the next page, upcoming accounting developments. Accounting changes and error correction, it's just enhanced accounting and reporting requirements for if you have a correction of an error or any kind of accounting changes. And then 101 is compensated absences. I mean, that goes back to GASB 16 back in 1992, how to account for compensated absences. So it was before PTO really existed, the terminology, and so it just updates that and gets everybody on the same page. And then our contacts on the final page. Welcome any questions or?
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
I know, I'm doing nicely. Oh, that was louder than I thought it was.
And then we need a motion to accept.
Yes.
Motion to accept. Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes to accept. And again, thank you for the hard work. All right, Lauren, status report since
I was
last
about to say,
week?
there's not much else. As you can see in the workbooks, there's not even a budget or anything like that because nothing really changed in the last 5 days. The only thing else that's in there that does need approval are the dates for the next few meetings, or for the next year. The very last page of the workbook is the proposed meeting dates for 2024. The audit committee typically reviews these and accepts these as their meeting dates for going forward. We kept the same schedule as we typically do, Tuesdays on non-council weeks, and staggered similarly to meet the requirements that we have for our office. So if y'all are okay with those, we can approve those.
We need a motion to approve that schedule.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to accept the schedule. Any considerations for future meetings? Kevin?
This will not increase my popularity rating, but I believe we have not completed our ethics training for this board.
Oh,
That's gonna be
yes.
February.
It is gonna be in February.
I was gonna put it on the February meeting just because I didn't know how long this one would last, and since it's y'all's third meeting in about a few weeks, we decided to put it in February.
All right, well, if that attempt to crash my popularity rating failed, let me try again.
What else you got?
I think it would benefit the committee if all of us had our CGIS completed.
I'm done.
Are you done?
I'm gonna go get, I'm fingerprint scheduled.
Okay, anybody else?
I've got the information. I'm working on it.
Yeah, I've got to get
Progress.
done.
On my desk, I've reviewed it. I intend to complete it maybe by next meeting. Would that be a good threshold?
I think it'd be great. I had the good fortune of having mine reinstated as long as I got to do a little continuing education. It almost feels like I got a traffic ticket, but I think we can get that done. But it is foreseeable that we will have events that we're going to need that, and we've been light on it in the past. So I was going to urge that participation here as well as with the administration. There have been some gaps there over the years, and it's an easy item to overlook in a transition. It's also a hard one to complete sometimes, seriously, because of fingerprinting and all that, but it'd be good for us to get it done.
It's easier than it used to be, I will say.
Yeah.
The process. What was the old process?
You had to go to TBI, it was real, not fun.
Mine was close to the house. It was awesome. It was right there. Off
location.
the Harding, yep.
Thank you for that. So your popularity is still intact.
I'm going to have to try harder for the next meeting. I can see that coming already. All right.
All right, with that then, the meeting is adjourned.
All right. Thank you.